anybody there?
Oh, hi. Hi, Jaime.
¿Cómo estás?
Bien, gracias. ¿Cómo estás tú?
Muy bien, mucho gusto.
Mucho gusto. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can. You sound amazing. You sound great.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
Where are you, Jaime? ¿Dónde estás?
estoy en Wyoming.
En Wyoming. Wow.
Where are you? ¿Dónde estás?
Toronto. En
Oh, my
Toronto.
goodness.
Yeah,
¿Hasta
in
allá?
cold. Hasta allá. Lejos, lejos de todo.
Oh, my goodness. Well, okay. Vamos a empezar. Are you good?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, Laury, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'm really excited to chat. And as we were just getting to know each other, you are all the way in Canada.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jaime. Thanks for the invite.
This is so exciting for me because I'm curious to know how one gets to Canada, right?
How do you end up in Canada?
Let's start there.
Well, actually, my wife is from Canada, so that's
Okay.
kind of why we ended up there. But it's been it's been kind of like a crazy journey to get me here because I moved to Canada when I was 19.
Oh, wow.
To study acting. We'll get into it afterwards. And I met my wife there, but we were just friends. We weren't together. And then I moved to Spain and I studied theater in Spain afterwards. And then my now wife came to Spain because she wanted to learn Spanish and things. And there we met each other again. And then we fell madly in love. And then we were happy in Spain and whatever, but then they didn't renew her papers to work and live there. Yeah. So we're like, okay. And Canada is not a bad place to go, so we ended up in Toronto like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's
but
beautiful.
I like it here. Yeah.
Oh, I bet. But I think it might take Spain to kind of get you into that into that sort of like romantic elevated state. For good things to happen. Well, that's a beautiful story. It sounds like. So to begin with, you're Mexican. Un fellow compadre?
Un fellow mexicano, compadre mexicano,
muy bien.
Compatriota. Yeah, I'm from Mexico City originally. I was born and grew up mostly in Mexico City to a Brazilian father. That's why my name is a bit strange for the Hispanic world. Laury, no one is called Laury. I think probably in the world. There's very few Laurys. Yeah, people always think I'm a woman because of the name Laury.
See.
But no, but it's not the case. So my father is from Brazil and my mother is from Mexico City. So I grew up mostly in Mexico City with 2 or 3 years that I lived in Havana, Cuba. Yeah.
So it seems that
my father moved to Cuba. Yeah.
You've been kind of in different places. Do you feel like they have been a part of you culturally, like they've helped you evolve culturally? How would you describe that cultural blend that is you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in many ways, like it's interesting because I've thought a lot about it. Like, obviously, I'm a foreigner everywhere now. Like, even in Mexico, now that I go to Mexico, people are like, "Oh, you speak really good Spanish." I'm like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "Actually, I do. Thank you." It's the only language I speak well, but thank you. So even in Mexico, people think I'm a foreigner now. So I mean, that's kind of like who I've always been, and I think. Partly because my name too, like my mom wanted to call me Diego, and I kind of wish she had called me Diego because then it would be a lot easier for my Hispanic identity to be there. But
because it's such a simple thing. It may not seem like a big deal, but something like a first name.
Oh yeah,
it can either put you at a distance or it immediately just makes you an other.
Exactly. Yeah,
and even something like mine's not as random, but it's Jaime. But here in Wyoming, I've always been Jamie. So
Jamie,
it's always
a different person.
Yeah, you feel like you have a different personality. But for you growing up in Mexico then and having a father from Brazil, can you describe a little bit what growing up was like in that environment in a multicultural place back in the 80s?
Back in the 80s, I was born in 1984. So, I mean, it was very strange because in Mexico, I mean, well, you probably know it, Jaime, now I think it's a bit different. It's more multicultural, but Mexico City back then was like a very closed off place, right? Like now I went to Mexico City like 3 months ago and it's crazy. It's like full of people from everywhere and it's fantastic. It's great. But back in the 80s, I think because the PRI was in power, the political party that was in power, it was really closed off. It was kind of like a dictatorship-ish.
Almost isolationist, in a lot of respects.
Yeah, and I remember when the free trade agreement happened in the 90s, 94, it was crazy. We started getting products from the US and like Jolly
Yeah.
Ranchers and things like,
Yep.
and I still have a memory of like opening up and being like, wow, these Jolly Ranchers are amazing.
I'm right there with you, man. I was part of that generation, so I have these really interesting memories. I mean, I come from a family of immigrants, grandparents,
Right.
and kind of back and forth to the U.S. and back. And that moment, mid '90s, was so. It was like the gates of heaven opening up, and then you
Yeah.
got to go into the candy store in many cultural ways, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
do you think that influenced you a lot to yearn for that kind of culture, or how did you feel about that? How did you respond?
Yeah, I mean, I liked it. Yeah, yeah. As I said before, I grew up in a very multicultural background because I always went to international schools as well as a kid. So
Mm,
like, I always
okay.
grew up in a multicultural background. So it was interesting for me culture. I think it gave me a universal idea of what humans are.
Mm,
Like it allowed me not to judge the other just by wherever they're from, for example. Something that for me was so simple, and I discovered it was actually it's one of
yeah.
the big problems of the 21st century. But culturally, yeah, like it shaped me completely in the idea of like, who am I as a person, who am I as a writer, like all of these things are completely shaped by the idea of not being from an actual place, or not belonging, better, it's a better word, not belonging to an actual place. It
Right.
made me belong in every way. Yeah, and it was
Yeah.
interesting too because like it made me see that who like the place where I'm from, literally it's my apartment. And it
Mm,
can be anywhere. It can be in Spain, it can be in Canada. And like my life, what we would call home, it's like my books, my partner, my dogs, but that is kind of like my country, let's say. And I still feel very Mexican in some
yeah.
respects, right? Like
Yeah.
food, for example, like
Uh-huh.
that's where like I feel a real Mexican likes Mexican food, and I love Mexican. I eat chips with salsa, right? So like
Yeah.
with Valentina sauce. So if you do that, you're Mexican. If you eat eggs with spice, you're Mexican,
You're good
right?
to
So
go. Yeah.
yeah, you're good to go. Yeah. I'm not a
So
big tequila drinker, but other than that,
yeah, I mean, I'm getting older now, so I get sleepy when I do tequila now. It's
yeah,
kind of it's a big task.
yeah,
So speaking of your writing and performance,
yeah.
I love that you're doing performance too, because we could talk about that. Being a theater person myself, I'd love to chat with you
Right,
about that maybe later. But
right.
specifically for writing, how does that come into your life, and how do you feel like are you at the stage where you want to be now in terms of identifying as a writer?
As a writer,
Yeah.
yeah, certainly I am now. Like I've published two novels in Spain. My first novel was published then in the US as well, and in English as well, and it's getting published this year in Italy as well. So that's very exciting.
Hmm.
And my second novel was published in Spain 2 years ago. So I certainly feel now that I'm more comfortable with the concept of writing, like writing as a part of my life, as a part of my identity, as part of who I am. I actually don't do, I used to do a lot of theater, but I don't do theater anymore. I just,
Mm,
sadly enough, now I just focus on my writing.
hmm.
And yeah, it came to be, it was very natural for me. Actually, I always say I was a writer before knowing I was a writer, because I always wrote a lot,
Hmm.
but I kind of like, I didn't think that it was something you could do, like, I don't know, as an artist. I felt it was kind
Yeah.
of like isolating. I grew up in a very artistic background because my mom is a ballet dancer. Well, now she's a
Oh,
ballet teacher. She's older now, but
okay.
she was a ballet dancer. So being an artist or doing something related with the arts was always kind of like, it was always there. It was never a choice for me. It was like, it's what you do, right? Like you live, you do art, and that's kind of what you do.
Right.
And yeah, and my parents met in the Soviet Union. It's a
Oh,
very
goodness.
crazy story. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because my dad was a communist back in the day, and there was a military dictatorship in Brazil in the 60s and 70s and the 80s too. We went from 64 till 85, the military dictatorship. So they wanted to kill my dad because he was a communist
Oh,
and he
my
was involved in
goodness.
student movements and things. So he had to flee Brazil. And he went to Argentina, and then he went to France, and then he went to the Soviet Union. That's where my parents met up, and they became a couple, and then they had me in Mexico City, and then we moved to Cuba for a couple of years. It's a crazy story, and then my parents got divorced, and then we moved back, my mom and I, to Mexico City. So in Mexico City, all that to say that in Mexico City, in our apartment, my mom set up a ballet classroom. So like the arts were always there, right? So like basically I didn't have a living room, I had a ballet classroom. So the arts were there. So it was kind of natural. I mean, they didn't read all that much. My parents, like, they read, they read and read good things and whatnot, but not as much. But for me, books were always kind of like another home. I always liked reading since I was a kid. I mean, I like sports and other things too, but I really like reading. So it came naturally. So then when I started doing theater in the beginning, what I used to do, I wanted to be an actor originally. And what I used to do was write the biographies of the characters, right? So like that was already an exercise in writing. Like I would write all these crazy biographies and then when I directed plays, I would write kind of like all the movements, everything that the characters did. So basically, there were novels without being called novels because I didn't create the characters, but they were novels. And then I started writing when I moved to Canada. I started writing more seriously, partly because of the theatrical context here. That I didn't enjoy it all that much. Like, I mean, the people were great, but you need a lot of money to make theater in Canada. It's very expensive, and that was kind of like that was kind of a decision that I didn't want to be calling people asking for money all the time. And I didn't have that stamina to do that. So I started kind of writing more seriously after that. Yeah.
Okay. So you've gone through most of your trajectory here from childhood to adulthood. That was very concise. Yeah. Thank you for that. That was incredible. So
you're welcome. Yeah.
That puts us in this moment here where I kind of wanted to talk about how your literary journey has been in Canada and what has led you to work with Laberinto Press. If we could talk a little bit about that project and just some details to get us started.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Canada is an interesting place to be in as a writer because it's very cold. So basically 6 months of the year, you can write with no distractions. Because it's so cold. Like it's literally such a cold place that I mean, people go out and things, but I still find it very cold to be like in -20, like walking around. People do it here, and it's crazy. So it's a great place to write, and also there's a lot of support from the government, right? There's a lot of government support, so it's easier to make a living from writing than it would be in other places. Actually, Mexico has a good support system from the government too, but I feel in Canada the governments give a lot of money to arts in general, so that is kind of like a good thing. So I started writing here more disciplined in a way, partly because of the weather and partly just because of the way you have to do it. If you want to write novels, maybe short stories and poetry are a different thing, but I wanted to write novels. I was attracted to the genre. I always read a lot of novels, and so I started writing in that way. And with Laberinto Press, I don't remember how we met with Luciana, who's the editor of Laberinto Press, really great editor. But there was an anthology that she was working on the intersection between visual arts and literature. And she invited me to participate in that. And I participated in that. I wrote a short story about kind of like a fake travelogue of a 15th century character, 16th century character that goes to Italy with a painting, etc. It's a bit confused in the history of tomatoes, the intersection of like Mexican tomatoes that go, how they went to Europe, and kind of like a weird travelogue, fake travelogue in the end, because it was a short story. And then, we got along really well. Like, she's a fantastic person. And actually, my third novel that's getting published this year in Spain is going to be published here with Laberinto Press in 2024 as well. So it's a great project. I feel it's a project that's trying to get more Hispanic authors and international authors into Canada, because in some ways, and I feel I agree with the principle of Laberinto. I think Canada is it's funny because it's a very multicultural place, but it's a bit closed off to writing in other languages, right? Like, if you write in English, there's a lot of possibilities, even if you're from different backgrounds. But if you write in another language, and I mostly write in Spanish, or basically only write in Spanish, it's a bit harder to get into the publishing industry here. So what Laberinto is trying to do is kind of like build a bridge between non-English communities within Canada.
Yeah. And I think that's a service that helps not just folks in Canada, but here in the US, having a place like Laberinto Press to bring out a lot of this work. Even myself, and I'm not too knowledgeable in Latin American or literature in Spanish, that I feel like this is just a great opportunity for people like me to get to become more acquainted with great writers like you and people who are creating contemporary work that is just as good as something that would be written in English, as its main, language. So Can you tell me a little bit about the novel that you're working on, or the one that's coming out in 24?
Yeah, the one that's coming out here in Laberinto Press in Spain, it's coming out before. It's a story. It's actually interesting because it's my first novel that doesn't take place in Mexico City. So I feel like it's funny because we were talking about belonging, and I always say like, oh, I'm very multicultural, international, but still I mostly write about Mexico City. I have like an obsession with that place. Have you been to Mexico City,
I
Jaime?
have, yeah, a couple of times.
Yeah, what did you think about it?
It's madness. I come from Jalisco, the biggest place you
All
get is
right.
Guadalajara, and I'm
Guadalajara, yeah.
more like an offshoot of Guadalajara. So it definitely going to Mexico City feels like you're, it's very difficult to explain. It's just sprawling and
It's
massive.
crazy. Massive and insane. And
you get a sense of scope that you don't really get anywhere else.
Yeah. It's like a writer, a Mexican writer that's really funny and really dark. Guillermo Fadanelli says it's a branch of hell in Mexico City. So, but it's really great. I mean, hell has to be really fun as well, right? So it's really great. It's a really fun city, but it's kind of like inhabitable. But it's an obsession of mine because it's just such a crazy. Like I feel every story that has happened in the world could take place in Mexico City. Like everything wrong, great. You have heaven, hell, everything together, right? So it's a big city. But this is my first book that it doesn't take place in Mexico City. Kind of part of it doesn't take place in Mexico City. It's the story of two twins, a man and a woman, who split up, or they were born in Mexico City, and in the earthquake of 1985, there was a huge earthquake in Mexico City. They split up, and some traffickers, human traffickers, stole the girl. Her name is Ondine, from her family because there was a big mess afterwards. Their parents died and everything. They stole her and brought her to the States. She grew up in the States. And the guy, Lucas is his name, he grew up with his aunt in Mexico City and whatever. So this is all the background. But they meet again in Toronto in 2017 when there was another earthquake in Mexico City that kind of destroyed the city, and they kind of meet after that, and we discover their story. And it's kind of like it's a story about their last 10 years. Like what I was interested in is how we got to the place where we got pre-COVID, not after COVID, because after COVID, I think history changed a bit. But pre-COVID, what happened in the last 10 years that took us to Trump, that took us to Brexit, that took us to all of this kind of like neo-fascist type of ideologies, and like why people responded in that way. So through this story of these two twins, I wanted to do kind of like a recount of the past decade, like now it would be like the last 15 years of the global history, right? Like of a global history. So it takes place. It's also about a bit about the history of Toronto, the history of Canada a bit, and how they lived here, how they both settled here for different reasons. And it was kind of like my way also to have a certain way of belonging in the city, a way of like understanding the history of the city, always from the point of view of an immigrant here, because in the end, my characters are immigrants, and what being an immigrant meant here in a context that's not. It's interesting because they're both not economical migrants, it's a different type of migration that I think happens a lot in Canada. In the States, maybe a bit less. Like I think in the States, people move there, particularly certainly from Mexico, because like our governments are so inept that have left people in desperate situations. But to Canada, like the type of migration in Canada, we have that too, of course, but it's a lot of lifestyle kind of migration, right? It's to have a better life, but not necessarily because they had an economical problem previously or things like that. So I wanted to kind of explore that idea, what it meant, all the cliches, the stereotypes of Latinos and etc. that they have here as well, right? So I wanted to explore this kind of like friction, or this kind of like this tension a bit between different cultures in the city. Yeah.
It's beautiful because you strike me as somebody who has such an openness. There's maybe like an optimist in you. Do you feel like that reflects in the work, especially when talking about an immigrant assimilating?
Right.
Is that a positive experience in the work, or do you feel like that's something that you still have to grapple with in a darker sort of way?
Yeah, I do grapple with in a darker sort of way. It's funny because I do have a sense of optimism in many ways, in the way of people, the way we relate, the connections that we can meet. Like, I mean, like this one right now. Like I do have a very optimist outlook in that way, like personal to person or person to person connections. But I do feel there's this bleakness in the world that kind of like weighs on us, and that certainly my work is very reflected or very impregnated kind of by that bleakness. This is by far my third novel, the one it's called Time, Place, and Us. By far my most optimistic novel. It's by far, my two previous novels are a lot darker in many ways, but this one is my most optimistic novel, and I kind of wanted to write a bit like that, in that kind of like optimistic way, about the story of these twins that re-meet afterwards, and kind of like history gave them the chance to meet again after being split apart. But I do feel there's a lot of, I mean, even in Canada, there's a lot of racism, unfortunately. I feel there is a lot of misunderstandings between people. I mean, as far as the migrant experience goes, probably Canada is one of the best places in the world. And there's still quite a bit of racism, which is crazy for me. It's like, how is it in other places, right?
Yeah, it can be pretty harrowing for some folks, especially those who may not have the tools of language, which I think is always sort of the biggest barrier. Now, this work, can you tell me a bit about, I mean, this feels like a timely work, because we are in need of that optimism, and we do need some of that energy to come back into the world. Can you tell me about the writing process of it, maybe how long it took, or how you go about putting a work like this together?
Yeah. It took me, like, I usually take around 3-4 years per book with research and everything. And this one took me around 3 years, and it was very difficult to write. It was actually the hardest book that I've written. I mean, I've only written 3, but it certainly was the hardest one to write. And at some point I wasn't really understanding why. I was like, what's going on? Why is it not working? Like, why am I having so much trouble writing about Canada? Like, this is crazy. I've lived here for 11 years, but somehow I felt like I wasn't allowing myself to write about Canada. And that taught me a lot of, too, like how I still perceive myself as an immigrant here. It's a I mean, people call me Canadian, I have the passport, everything, but I still, like, you see that I feel like I'm not allowed to say certain things, right?
So you felt like maybe you had to gloss over it, or you couldn't go deep enough because you're still a guest.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
In some way.
Yeah. In some way. And I'm like, no, if I'm from here, like, if I'm supposed to be from here, and there's this rhetoric that we're all Canadians and things, then I'm allowed to talk like I would about Mexico, right? Like, I would not sugarcoat Mexico at all to anyone, because I feel I'm allowed. But here, I still feel somehow that I'm like, kind of, I guess, a welcome guest in some places, but a guest,
right.
no? And it's not anything that people do. It's like, I think it's a self-perspective, because everyone I meet is really friendly and really, really great. But yeah, I feel there is a bit of a self censorship in that way that I had to overcome. So I changed kind of the structure of the book. I began it at a different place. I think I was kind of like writing, it wasn't a thriller at the beginning, but it was certainly more suspense. And then I realized it was wrong. Like, it was kind of like, I needed the twins to meet, like, to be clear at the beginning that they re-met and that they were twins and whatever. And kind of that structure changed completely, but it was an interesting experience in writing. It was certainly difficult. But it had beautiful moments too. Like, when I finished the book, I couldn't believe it. My wife was like, no way you finished it, because I thought at some point, like, I'm not gonna finish this one, like, I'm gonna abandon this one. But no, in the end I finished it, and I'm really happy with the way it ended up. And part of it was written in Banff. There's this there's this artists residencies that they do in Banff. Banff is like a town in Alberta in the mountains, beautiful place. And 2 weeks I spent there in a writer's retreat writing it, which was really great and a bit insane, because I wrote around 50 pages in like 2 weeks, which was a lot for me. And I was dreaming about the book. It was like this complete immersion in the book. I didn't like the experience, actually. I thought it was it can go a bit crazy. Yeah. I was like inhabiting that world. I was like writing tons every day from like 9 a.m. to like 9 p.m. nonstop. So I would dream of, like, the book. One of the characters has a bookstore in the book. And I would dream that I was in the bookstore with a character, like, really insane. Like, it's never happened to me before. I was like, okay, this was a good experience, but I don't think I'm going to repeat it. I was writing in the morning and going out.
This is the first time I've heard of a retreat having an adverse reaction to the writing. But it's wonderful to see, because I also think that maybe some of us writers need to have a bit of distance from it, at least, moments of peace from that conflict, from those, because, maybe you strike me as somebody who feels those things so intensely that if you give yourself a little bit too much time, you're just going to get sucked in, and it's going to consume you.
It does consume you. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah. Like I do feel you need a bit of space to think
mm,
about other things and I mean, I think for the writing itself, for the novel itself, it was good, that
mhm.
retreat, but for my mental state, certainly it wasn't. It was, yeah, it was really, and more because there was this massive snowstorm in Toronto and
Mm,
I was in Banff, and then my wife had to take care of it. And I just felt kind of guilty of like not being
oh, yeah.
taking care of like the household things as well, which
Yeah.
we did together. So when I came back, my dog, she used to be really well trained, and when I came back, she wasn't anymore.
She was
So
rebelling. She said,
she was
"Oh,
rebelling,
this is
yeah,
my
she was
chance."
rebelling, yeah, and I think my wife didn't discipline her as much as I do, so, like, now she and I never got her trained again, so
Oh
anyways,
my
that writer's
goodness.
retreat was great for the book, but bad for everything else. No, it was great, and I met really great friends there, and, like, yeah, I have a really good friend, Pashamala, who's a writer as well, and it was just great because I met him there. He was my they call him the what do they call him? Not your supervisor, the
Uh,
I don't mentor, like a mentor.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
mentor. And he was my mentor there. And he's great. And we became really good friends and shared taste in literature and things. So it did come out with many positive things,
Yeah.
but it was intense. Yeah. Yeah. I would recommend you, if you do it, not to do it as intensely as I did it.
So, that's a great thing to hear about community, that
Yeah.
it seems like you've been able to find a creative support group there that
Yeah.
is sort of making you go the distance on some of these works. Can you tell me a bit about how one goes about developing community for themselves in a place
Right.
where they're maybe maybe not necessarily the immigrant, but maybe feel like an other? What does that
Right.
look like for somebody?
Yeah, I think a good way, I think because the Hispanic writers community is so small in Canada, it's very easy. Like basically if they invite you to do an anthology, that's it. You met everyone there because like there's like 20 of us or something. Like it's growing, but like it's very, very small. So and it's very supportive in many ways. So I feel it's a nice kind of like non-competitive community.
Mm,
And I think Laberinto, that anthology, was great because I met many people that way too. But it's true that yeah, as a writer, you do feel kind of isolated, right? Like it's an
mhm,
isolating discipline. Like you to write, you have to be alone. I mean, I know there's many writing groups, but I feel it's more like for the friendship of it than the
mhm,
actual writing. For me, anyways, for me to write, I need to be alone and concentrated and focused and in silence and whatever. So it was a bit hard in the beginning of finding a community. I'm also like not. It's funny because when I talk to people, I'm not really shy. I'm not a shy person at all, but I'm a deep introvert. Like for me to go out to a party or something like that, it takes a lot. Like
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
alone in a room and I'm happy that way. I guess because I grew up that way. Like my mom was teaching ballet and I was in a room alone reading books. So
Mm.
like
So you're an
I'm
only
still like
child
that.
too, right?
I'm an only, well,
Okay.
I have a half sister,
Oh, okay.
which I consider my full sister. It's like she's my sister, but we didn't grow up together. We
Mhm,
like she grew up in Cuba with my dad, and I grew up in Mexico City with my mom. So
mhm,
so in my experience, let's say in my everyday experience, I was alone. So for me, it was actually harder than for some people who just through social media or whatever meet other people because I just wouldn't. It's not in my nature to do that. So
yeah,
it's been nice to like meet other Hispanic writers here and feel a sense of community.
right.
Yeah, yeah, and also like it's been nice to meet non-Hispanic writers as well, in the sense that I feel when you're an immigrant, and I don't know if that's your experience at all, Jaime. So I don't want to generalize, but I feel you can get circled in small groups as well,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
it's good to meet people beyond like our sphere, right?
Right,
So
right.
so in that sense, that Banff program, for example, was fantastic. I met
Mm.
a lot of. I was the only non-English speaking writer in the program, so
Oh,
so
wow.
it was an interesting experience. Yeah.
So, oh, I was gonna ask you, the challenges of seeing your work come to life in another language. As
Right.
you mentioned, you were writing in Spanish, and to shepherd this along, obviously with great collaborators like the folks at Laberinto Press. Can
Right.
you describe that process? Editorially, what happens when you
Right.
have to go from Spanish to English, or maybe if we can point to the piece that you had in Beyond the Gallery, which was the anthology, right?
Right. Yeah.
As an example there, what was that editorial process like to go from Spanish to English?
Yeah, well, I have the luck that my spouse, my wife, is a translator of my books, so it
Oh.
makes things a bit easier. Yeah. She's the one who's translating my last novel, and she translated my previous novel, my first novel, sorry, and like so that process is a lot easier because we share everything. So like we
Mm-hmm.
communicate, and but it is difficult, and it is also difficult what's happened to me that I mostly publish in Spain. So it's kind of like you're publishing in another world. Things are happening to your book, but like in you don't connect it to the city you live in and whatever. It's all through
Yeah.
the internet that I see things, or I go usually to, and I'm gonna go in September now when it gets published in Spain. I go to present the book and the book launch and whatever, and it's like 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks, you live kind of like what it would be to be if you were writing in the place that you were publishing the book. But the experience here has been different. And with Laberinto Press, the process was simpler in that way because my wife translated the story and then we did the edits according to that. And the way we're going to do the third book as well. So we're going to translate the book and then we're going to do the edits and then retranslate whatever needs to be translated. But it adds an extra step for sure.
Mm.
But I do feel like some people ask me sometimes, like, why don't you just write in English? It's like, I don't know. I feel like Spanish is the language it's kind of like an act of resistance as well. But I feel like I like the ñ. I like the letter ñ. Like I don't know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like
Well, it feels
yeah.
it feels like more of an extension of your soul rather than a full
Right.
translation of something. And yeah, I mean that makes
Right.
perfect sense. Why would you why would you add another step when you can do
Right.
it in one? You know, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like I don't know how I would write in English. Like I mean I can write an email in English, but they're usually bad. So I don't know how I would write in
Well,
English. But
your emails
yeah.
seem pretty okay. I have to say they seem
Thank
pretty
you.
good, and there's no doubt that you could probably do it better than most folks. But in terms of that relationship of working with someone who knows you so intimately, like your partner,
Right.
how what kind of learning experiences are there to gain from that? Because that's got to be a very delicate balance that you have to strike
Right.
where um
Yeah.
at what point is this an editorial relationship, professional
Right.
relationship
Right.
versus the other, or is there no line?
Well, I learned to say yes to everything. That's no, I'm joking. No, I mean there were certainly moments of I'm a very impatient person, which is I mean, and in literature, I feel one of the big lessons that it has given me, as opposed to like many emotional and intellectual and whatever lessons, is to be patient because literature takes time. It takes time to write books. It takes time to read books. It takes time to publish books. So it's given me patience a bit more than I have. But naturally, I'm an impatient person. So yeah, like I don't know, at lunchtime sometimes my wife wanted to tell me, "Oh, I have a question about the translation." So I was like, "No, we're gonna do an hour where we sit and we go over the questions because I can't have all these questions all the time." So it was a funny and my wife is the opposite. She's like the most patient, great person. And I'm very impatient, so it's all my fault. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly been a learning experience of how to
Mm,
collaborate in an intellectual way. But she's so precise, such a precise translation that I always say, and I'm not joking, I think the translation is better than the original because
mm,
she's such a good editor in her head. Like, I don't know, for example, the other day she was translating something. She asked me like, I said decorate a house, and she's like furnish the house is a better word, and I was like, oh yeah, of course. She went to
mm,
buy furniture. Why did I say decorate the house when she furnished the house? So any things like that, and then I changed back in Spanish, right? That
uh-huh.
because she's a very accurate reader. So in that way, it's been really fulfilling to have someone that knows the work so well and that has the allows herself to like tell me these things. And also this third book, for example, many of the spaces that the characters lived in are spaces that we lived in together. For example, an apartment of one of the characters was our apartment. So she knows it perfectly. So for
Mm,
me, it would be almost absurd if somebody else translated it because like
mm,
she knows the structure, the way the apartment looks, the light. She knows exactly what place in the city I'm talking about, what restaurant I'm talking about. So
mhm.
she can picture it better in her head. And I feel she can translate it better that way as well.
That's
Yeah.
just incredible. It's just having built-in support from the get-go,
Yeah.
especially with something where you are drawing from the settings and the places that you've lived in and you've seen. That's got to be such a
Right.
such an asset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. It is, and from the beginning, I mean, like always, my first editor is her, because I mean, she studied literature as well. She studied comparative literature at University of Toronto. She did a PhD, but she never really wanted to write. Like, it's
Mm.
not it's not her thing. But she loves literature. Like, she's always read tons of books. So it's been really great to have that feedback from the beginning. Like, actually, if the book doesn't go through her, I don't publish it. It's like she reads the book first. She's like my censor. She reads the book first, and if it passes that step, then so it's great to have a reader that knows the work so well. That can tell you, like, no, this doesn't work. I'm so sorry about it. But
Oh,
generally, she's
wow.
really supportive. She's not very critical at all. And sometimes I do feel that when you finish a manuscript, maybe you need more of that. Maybe you need more support at that initial part, and then you can go over the bad things and whatever. But that support is very important. We're very vulnerable artists, right, in general. So that vulnerability, acknowledging it, I think it's very, very important to take care of it and have empathy towards other writers and
Absolutely.
people like that. Yeah.
So I imagine that you're generating pretty often for work and potential new stories, new novels, and things
Right.
like that. How do you assess if a work or maybe an idea or a bundle of ideas has the legs to become a novel? Is
Right.
that something that you only learn by writing the thing out, or is that something that's more intellectual for you?
For me, it is by writing the thing out. Like, if I have an idea, I go for it. And I mean, I guess, like many writers, I have many manuscripts that I left like 10 pages down there. I was like, you know what? This doesn't work. But sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you have to like let yourself work before you say it doesn't work, because like sometimes you have a natural resistance to work, right?
Oh, I lost you. Can you hear me? I think you got muted. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay, just backtrack a little bit to the beginning of that answer and we'll be good to go.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine.
Yeah, so I do feel you have to go through the writing itself, or I have to. I mean, I can speak about other writers to see if the idea works or not. Like, I do have to write the idea fully. And then I notice quickly, I'm like, you know what? This is not going to work. I'm not going to devote this 3 years of my life. It's just, I'm not interested enough, or it doesn't feel like you. It's, yeah, I do. And then when I'm writing, I'm like, okay, yeah, this does work. This is what I want to, and what works for me might not work for someone else. Like, I've always said, like, I don't write to please people. Like, I don't care so much if other people don't like my books. Like, I write the books that I would want to read. And to me, there's something funny that happens. I don't know if this happens to you, Jaime, but when I'm starting to get an idea for a book and I want to write a book and I feel like, yeah, this excites me, I want to read that book. Like, I literally sometimes go to the bookshelf and it's like, where is this book that I want to read? And it's like, it doesn't exist, so I have to write it. But it's just for me as a reader, right? And then you hope that people can that you can share that with people ultimately, that someone will connect with the book, and if they don't, it's fine. And I've learned to say that, like, some books that I love reading, then I recommend them to friends and they're like, oh, that book was awful. Why do you like it? Oh, really? That was like a masterpiece. Anyway, so I feel literature, like books find the right reader at the right time. And I have this like mystical idea that a book will find you in the time you need that book. The best books are the books you need at that moment, for whatever reason, aesthetics, whatever reason.
That's beautiful, because I do think, and I I was talking to a guest earlier today, and we got into this kind of part of the podcast where we start talking about the woo-woo, what people call the almost spiritual aspect of this whole thing.
Right.
And you mentioned two things that that really strike me. The first one being that you almost have to manifest it before you write it, and you have to visualize it. And there's a book on the shelf that will come true one day. Maybe somewhere in the back of your mind, you're telling yourself that. And then there's this other part of it of the book is on its way to a person, and it will eventually find that right moment in that person's life that will allow it. And so I'm curious, just, this is a long way to kind of ask, do you feel that there is a spiritual fulfillment of some kind in your writing, in that process, or is it more about the craft without that
Right.
kind of spiritual connection, if you will.
Connection. Yeah, I do feel, I mean, there's certainly a lot of craft and a lot of like, I mean, I certainly don't feel very spiritual on Monday mornings when I sit in my desk and I start writing. So there's a lot of discipline for sure. There's a lot of craft. But I do think that literature has this otherness to it too. There has this kind of like this appeal, this attraction. I mean, I'm not a religious person at all. I don't believe in God. I'm a full atheist.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like kind of always a bit yeah, wary about like the woo was always said. I'm like that too. But I do feel there's this kind of like almost mystical element to literature that it really illuminates. And I think this is what it is. I think it illuminates areas of your life that you weren't aware of or you hadn't really seen before. And I think that does bring, I don't know if a spiritual, but certainly like a almost transcendent experience in the sense that it makes you grow as a person, literally in an empathic way. And I do feel like it shows you things that without literature you would have no access to. And in that way, there is a certain revelation, if you want to call it as such, which is a very biblical term by being a non-religious person. But I do feel like it does shed light. I think it's more that literature does shed a lot of light in things that we would not see otherwise. And I feel there is this there's an Italian writer I really like. He's called Giorgio Manganelli. He's dead now. He's been dead for a long time. But he defines literature as this sweet and rhythmic madness. And I kind of like, I love that term.
Yeah.
And by madness, it means there's this irrational nature to it too. And I feel that is the attraction. So if we were to define spirituality like that, like in a connection to an otherness and being able to see inside someone else's mind and emotions and things, and yeah, then I would say there is a spiritual element in it.
So there is at least an ecstatic thing that happens there. Not so much a spiritual one, but maybe something that does make you feel like you're less alone. And part of that collective experience.
Yeah, so, it's a deep connection for sure.
Yeah. Do you feel that your time as a theater artist, I don't know how long you did it or how much work you did in that, but do you think that made its way into your writing in some shape or form? I know that, I think you're kind of like me in that you just want to be at home working on your thing, rather than being out and about and being open and vocal. Right. How do you feel that craft makes its way into your work now, or it has in the past?
Yeah. That's a very good question. I think in every way. I mean, I was really into theater. I think I was very, very much into theater. I loved it. It was a great experience. And I feel it formed me completely as not only as an artist, but as a human being. I think I got my aesthetic ideas, like the type of work that I wanted to do, that then, of course, it's what I'm doing now with my writing. But I think I learned the aesthetics, the aesthetic idea of what I wanted to do, the aesthetic principles of the type of work that I wanted to do. So it did form me in very deep ways. It formed me. Also, I feel it's interesting because like originally when I was younger, much younger, I wanted to be an actor, then a director. It's almost like I've been retrieving and like going back until I became a completely introspective person. And I kind of like blocked all of that out. But to me, I see it as part of a journey. I don't see it as something different. It's been an artistic journey that I think I had to go through that theater experience to end up writing, right? So for sure, like my whole aesthetic world, like the type of works that I like, the type of vibrancy that I wanted to do, it all came from the theater for sure. And my character analysis, the way I would also like craft ways, because I didn't write theater, what I wanted to do was direct plays. I had to analyze very deeply how these things were formed. And I feel that, of course, influenced me. Then when I became a writer, I wasn't like, I don't need to take a workshop or whatever, because I've already gone through this phase of how you structure things. I just need to learn how to write them. But like, I understand structures. I understand dramatic structures. Like it's something that I learned in theater as well. Yeah. And like how working with people, it's great, but it's very difficult to achieve your full idea too. And I think that's something I love about writing, that a book can be good or bad, but it's exactly the way I wanted it to be. And in theater, you depend so much, which is its beauty too, but you depend so much on the collaborative effort that is like, no, that's not the type of play that I wanted to do, right? So it's more out of your control. So
sure. Well, that's an interesting path, because you're right that we have to distinguish what is really our want rather than what our environment tells us that we want. And it seems like maybe back in the day when you were younger, that was all around you. So maybe you gravitated to that without acknowledging that it was you. So it's almost like you had to clear out sort of
Right.
that direction and go your own way. That's so fascinating. I just got a couple
Yeah.
more questions for, to be
Yeah,
mindful
for
of your
sure.
time, but this has been amazing, man. You're so
Yeah, thank you.
inspiring,
And
and the degree of intellectual quality that you have, and the just the your ability
oh,
to
thank you.
really give us a picture
Oh,
has
thank
been
you.
super
No, my
inspiring to
pleasure to
me.
be here.
I'm really, really emotional. It's so great. But
That's good.
right now, I just want to ask you real quick a very light question. What are some works of art or literature that you're into right now that are inspiring you, or maybe
Right.
just kind of lighting that fire again?
Yeah, yeah. I consume, I'm a very big consumer of art. I like all sorts of art. I love museums. I love paintings. I love Francis Bacon is a painter I absolutely adore. I love Goya, Velázquez. In Madrid, as I lived in Madrid, it was great because it was kind of like an open university because I could go to all these museums and see this fantastic work of art. So I learned a lot. Like as a person, it taught me a lot as a person. And in books, I'm because my book is being translated into Italian. It's coming out this year. I've been learning Italian lately, so I've been really into Italian literature, and it's just great. I love Natalia Ginsburg. She's such a wonderful writer. I mean, there's many books, many Italian books that I absolutely love, but I like all sorts of works of art. Like I don't know, books that have inspired me deeply. My perhaps my favorite book of all times is by this Austrian writer called Robert Musil. It's called The Man Without Qualities. It's kind of like the big works of the 20th century.
Hmm.
It's one of these books that I was telling you, Jaime, that it's for me, it's an absolute masterpiece. It's great, and I've recommended it. Many people find it boring, but I think I have a I have a slower sense of time, I guess. But I love that book. I love The Sleepwalkers by Herman Broch. There's this very unknown Italian writer, and I don't know why she's so unknown, that I absolutely love. Her book is called Verde Agua in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And she's Marisa Madieri is her name. And it's just an absolute wonderful, beautiful book. And I guess, I don't know why she wasn't so known, because women had a harder time publishing and things back in the day. But she's an absolutely wonderful writer, an absolutely wonderful writer. So yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of Hispanic literature I love. Pedro Páramo, de Juan Rulfo, it's one of my big works of art, and a lot of contemporary authors too. Thomas Bernhard, I love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like literature. I try to read everything. I'm not one of these people who are like, oh, I don't read things if they're dead, or I don't read things if they're alive. I'm not like that. I like reading living people, dead people, everything. Instructions of how to eat. I like reading in general. I can read everything. So yeah, I'm very open to that. But visual arts, I like movies a lot
Mm.
too. Yeah, I like all sorts of art, and I've been lucky enough to being exposed to many works of art in different matters, visual arts and things. Yeah. So
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
like art a lot in general, and I consume a lot of it too. Yeah,
Oh,
and
that's the
other
way to
things
be.
too. I watch a lot of soccer as well, but
Who do you
yeah.
follow? You got to get me on this tangent here.
In Mexico?
Yeah, yeah. ¿Quién le
In
vas?
Mexico, Pumas.
A Pumas.
Pumas.
Okay, you're good. You're
Pumas.
good.
They're good
Con
too?
que no le vayas a la América.
A la
Con es,
América, no,
le
no,
voy a
no,
las
la
Chivas.
América jamás. Chivas. Me gustan las Chivas mucho también. I like Chivas a lot. Yeah,
Okay,
but
yeah.
America, no, America is terrible. No,
That's
no, no. I
right.
don't know
That's
how
right.
people go to
Thank
America.
you. Thank you so much.
I know I have friends who go for America. I have really good friends, and I just don't understand them. I don't get them.
Yeah. Too
Yeah.
corporate, man. Too
I
much.
know,
I
too
don't get
much.
it.
Televisa, I don't get it. No, go for Chivas. Like, apoya las Chivas. Yeah, I like Pumas because it's the university team, and like
That's
I
right.
like Pumas. But I like Chivas too. I really like Chivas. I had a good friend, Diego, and when I was a kid, and I used to go for Chivas when I was a kid. As you see, I'm not a very loyal soccer follower. Like I watch a lot of it, but I can change teams all the
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it's like that. But I used to go for Chivas when my friend Diego was a big Chiva fan. Like he's a
Yeah.
massive, like he goes to the stadium, and like he came in Toronto, and he lives in Ottawa now, and he came to watch them when they played here in
Oh,
Toronto.
wow.
He's that big of a fan. So when we were kids, I used to go for Chivas because of because
That's
of him. But
amazing.
now I like Pumas too.
Yeah.
I like
Well,
soccer in general.
to make you feel better and to just let this off my chest, when I was a kid, I had a Pumas t-shirt, and that lasted like, a month. So I'm right there with you.
That's funny. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that, man. Lastly, I believe that maybe some folks aren't into resolutions so much or intentions for the year, but because this is my first weekend of doing interviews in 2023, I'm curious what your intentions or resolutions are for your craft. What are you looking to achieve for your craft this year?
Right. So I'm writing now. So my third novel is, as I said, is going to be published in Spain. So that's kind of like more or less done. I have to work on the edits and things, but yeah, but that's a different type of work. But I am writing on this novel that I'm finding difficult to write. It's my fourth novel, and it's kind of, I wouldn't want to call it autobiographical because I don't really like the term, but it's set in the 90s, 80s, 90s in Mexico City. And it's kind of exploring the things that we were talking about at the beginning. So I think one of my big resolutions is to find the peace, concentration, discipline of mind to be able to advance a lot in that book. I'm like 40 pages in it. Also, I'm already like I'm in the pool, or in the sea better, because it's going to take long. But I want to I want to write as much of that book as I can. I want to see if I can have, at least by the end of the year, at least 100, maybe 150 pages of that book written, because it's a book that I've been wanting to write for a long time. And I feel that my previous books have prepared me a bit craft-wise to be able to write this book, to find the angle and things. So I want to advance in that book. That's my big artistic resolution. I want to advance in that book. And in other resolutions, just if America doesn't win, then it's still fine.
Well, I think that's a wonderful, exciting note to end on. Laury, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This has been such an inspiring conversation for me. I feel like anytime I see a Mexican artist, creative, intellectual human being going out and achieving in the way that you have, to develop yourself and your craft in the way that you have, is just nothing short of empowering, and it makes my day. So I really want to thank you for your
day. Thank you.
Yeah, amazing contributions that you're making, my friend. I hope that hopefully down the road we get to chat when your book comes out, or anytime. I'd be happy to catch up.
Fantastic. It was great. It was a lovely experience. Great way to spend the day. It was fantastic to meet you.
Oh, awesome. Well, I appreciate it too. And I give you your Sunday back. I'm not sure what time it is over there, but
it's noon, so it's perfect. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it's absolutely perfect.
Earlier this morning, I was waking people up at like 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning. So thank you.
What time is it in Wyoming, Jaime?
What's that?
What time is it in Wyoming?
It is almost 10 o'clock here.
Almost 10 o'clock. Okay, so like
yeah. So I'm good now. I'm awake. Well, more than anything, I hope you take care and you have a wonderful time. And mucho gusto. Un gran placer.
And I look forward to getting to know your work as well. And speaking about your work, we spoke only about me, but I'm very interested in you as well. So.
Oh, well, I don't want to make it the Jaime hour. I want to make it the Laury hour.
Exactly.
Down the road.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, mucho gusto. Cuídate mucho.
Hasta luego. Muchísimas gracias.
Cuídate. Adiós.
Chao.